Recently, Behaviour have been making some great changes to Dead by Daylight. The action indicators make solo queue an overall much better experience. The challenge prompts make doing challenges less frustrating and more fun to do, and base kit borrow time, along with reassurance, makes countering camping much more practical. But despite all these good changes, Dead by Daylight faces a growing problem. That problem being tunneling. When I was recording footage for my medkit video, I played a good few solo queue survivor games, and throughout these games, tunneling was present in almost all of them. What was most unfortunate about the tunneling though was the fact that it felt like there was nothing I could do to stop it. Nowadays, tunneling is becoming increasingly common. In this video, I'm going to talk about why this is and how we could possibly fix Dead by Daylight's tunneling problem. To start off, let's first go over what exactly is tunneling. While this may seem like an obvious question, tunneling can mean different things to different people. To put it simply, tunneling is generally seen as focusing one survivor and hooking them consecutively while ignoring every other survivor. This leads to a generally unpleasant experience for the tunneled survivor. They don't get a break from chases to heal or to reposition themselves and are usually out of the game prematurely. If done effectively, the match becomes a 3v1 very early on. You don't need me to tell you how hard it is for the remaining survivors to win when they only have 3 players and most of his gens left. Because of all this, it is in the survivor's best interest to try and stop the killer from tunneling. But how can survivors stop tunneling? Currently, there are a few counters to tunneling, but I believe they just fall short of being a truly effective counter. I'm going to go over each of the counters and explain why I think they don't truly stop tunneling. First, let's look at base kit borrow time. Base kit borrow time allows you 10 seconds of endurance once you get taken off the hook, as long as you don't do any conspicuous actions. This is intended to give you enough time to make it to a loop if the killer does tunnel you. If they hit you, you can use the speed boost to get there. If they don't, you can use the 10 seconds where they can't hit you. While on paper this seems like a good idea, there are a few problems with it. First of all, there's a chance there's no strong loops within 10 seconds of the hook. The killer chooses which hook to place you on, so they can place you on a hook near unsafe pallets or tiles which have already had their pallets broken. This means it can be feasible for the killer to just wait out the 10 seconds. What if there is a strong tile nearby? Then the killer simply hits the survivor as soon as possible. While not as ideal as the first situation, the killer now has to hit the survivor just one more time. This is obviously easier said than done, and an experienced survivor will make this difficult for the killer. But the thing is with tunneling, is that it is usually the more inexperienced survivors that the killer tunnels. It should also be noted that once the survivor does get hit, and they have endurance, they will lose the ability to dead hard until they mend, making getting the last hit just a bit easier. Next we can look at both the perks borrowed time and off the record. Both these perks extend the endurance the survivor receives once they're taken off the hook. Borrowed time extends the endurance by 10 seconds, so 20 seconds total, and off the record increases the endurance to be 80 seconds long. Like base kit borrowed time, these two perks give you time to make it to a loop. Because of the extended endurance, this makes it so the killer can't just wait it out if they want to tunnel you. Unfortunately, if the killer figures out that you're running any of these perks, they can just hit you as early as possible, and it's the same situation that happens if they were to hit you early with base kit borrow time. Because of this, these perks don't really help too much if the killer tunnels you straight off the hook, and are only really useful if the killer finds you a while after you've been hooked. Now we can look at Decisive Strike. Decisive Strike activates for 60 seconds after you've been unhooked, and allows you to stun the killer if they pick you up for 3 seconds. Decisive Strike is deactivated if you do a conspicuous action. Before Decisive Strike was nerfed, it was the sole perk stopping most killers from tunneling. Now that the stun duration was changed from 5 seconds to 3 seconds, most survivors don't even consider bringing it. This is because getting struck by Decisive Strike now is nowhere near as punishing as before. In fact, the 3-second stun means nothing to certain killers, like Nurse or Blight, who can catch up very quickly to the survivor. Overall, Decisive isn't the most effective anti-tunnel perk because even if you hit the killer with it, they can catch back up to you relatively quickly. So after looking at the counters to tunneling and how they just fall short, I hope you can now see why tunneling is so strong. It's a strategy that isn't all that hard to pull off and one with few counters, all of which don't fully counter the playstyle. So how can we fix tunneling? Before we go over how to fix tunneling, we first must discuss why killers tunnel. I believe the reason most killers tunnel isn't to be toxic or mean. I think they do it because as it stands, tunneling is most of the time one of the best moves a killer can make. As we've seen, a lot of the time tunneling is a win-win situation for the killer. So if the killer is trying to win the game, why wouldn't they tunnel? Right now, killers have plenty of reasons to tunnel and few reasons not to. But why is this the case? What happened to make tunneling so prominent? Why is tunneling more common now than before? I believe there's 2 main reasons for this. Lack of risk for tunneling and lack of incentive to not tunnel. Let's first talk about the lack of risk when tunneling. Before, when Decisive Strike had a 5-second stun, there was always a risk when chasing an unhooked survivor. You could spend ages chasing them just for them to stun you. The 5 seconds gave them plenty of time to get enough distance to possibly start another lengthy chase. As I mentioned before when I was talking about the counters, the new 3-second stun doesn't give survivors enough distance to extend a chase enough for the killer to care. Now let's talk about the lack of incentive to not tunnel. Before, there were perks like Barbecue and Chili and Pop Goes the Weasel that encouraged you to leave the huck as soon as possible. Barbecue also rewarded unique hucks. With these perks nerfed, there's less incentive to chase other survivors. Nowadays, hucking a survivor also gives you less pressure. Let me explain. Before, when you hucked a survivor, you generated a good bit of pressure. The unhucked survivor needed to be saved and healed by another survivor. This occupied 2 survivors, so if you chased one different survivor, you'd only have 1 survivor on a gen. If you had gone back to tunnel the unhucked survivor, the unhucker could hop on a gen and you'd now instead be dealing with 3 survivors on gens. Coupled with the chance of the unhucked survivor having DS, tunneling wasn't as feasible. But nowadays it's different. When a survivor gets unhucked, they have plenty of options to self-heal themselves, whether that be with boons or medkits. This means instead of occupying 2 survivors after the survivor is unhucked, only 1 is occupied. So now if you chase another survivor, you'll have 2 survivors on a gen. But if you were to chase the unhucked survivor now, without the risk of DS, chances are another survivor will try to protect them. In this situation, you still have 2 survivors working on a gen, but you also have an injured survivor who can't heal, and another survivor who's giving you easier hits in order to save their teammate. Tunneling is now not only feasible, but the better option. So in order to fix tunneling, we need to make changes that incentivize killers to huck different survivors and to make changes to make hucking a recently unhucked survivor harder and more risky. We have to be very careful though when making the latter changes, because of the potential of survivors abusing them to take advantage of killers even when they don't tunnel. In order to try and make changes that are fair, I made a community post on my channel to ask my subscribers for ideas on how tunneling may be fixed to get some other views. I think I received some great ideas from them. I've used some of them along with my own ideas to create a list of changes that I think could help reduce tunneling in a manner that is both fair for killer and survivor players. First, let's go over changes to incentivize killers to huck different survivors. Change 1. After hucking a survivor, the killer receives haste for a short amount of time. This change would make it easier for killers to traverse the map after hucking a survivor. This would overall give them more pressure while also getting them away from the huck. The further they are from the huck, the less likely they are to go back to tunnel the survivor. This will make getting into a chase with a different survivor easier and incentivize the killer to do so. Change 2. Blood points incentive for unique hucks. This will simply encourage killers to go for different survivors like old Barbecue and Chili did. There isn't much to explain with this change, as it is just a straight up incentive to huck different survivors. Change 3. Hucking a survivor disables their item for a period of time. This is probably the change that needs the most explaining, but I believe this would greatly incentivize killers to spread out their hucks. One reason I see for tunneling that killers often give is that it's the only way they can win against strong items. When a survivor is a toolbox, if you don't tunnel them, they'll do gens faster. If they get unhucked and you leave them, they'll hop in a gen with the toolbox, so the killer has to tunnel them to stop this. This goes the same for medkits. If you leave the unhucked survivor, they'll just heal themselves quickly, so the killer has to down them before they even get a chance to heal. With this change, this wouldn't be the case. Any recently unhucked survivor wouldn't be able to use their medkit to heal, or their toolbox to rush out gens. This means the killer wouldn't need to tunnel survivors in order to counter their strong items. Also, if the whole team is strong items, the killer would now be encouraged to try and huck each of them in order to try and disable their items. This change would hopefully give killers a way to apply pressure by hucking different survivors. Change 4. Remove the self-healing from Circle of Healing. While this change might seem random, as mentioned before, Circle of Healing and medkits allow unhucked survivors to heal themselves without the need of another survivor. If the ability to self-heal was removed, along with medkits getting disabled from the previous change, then unhucked survivors would need to get healed by another survivor. This would give killers more pressure, as unhucking a survivor would occupy 2 survivors' time if the killer doesn't tunnel. That concludes all the changes I'd make to killers to try and incentivize them to huck different survivors. Now let's talk about some changes to survivors that makes getting tunneled harder. Change 1. Revert Decisive Strike to have a 5-second stun. When I posted a community post, this was by far the most suggested idea, and for good reason. Old Decisive Strike punished killers for tunneling in a way that felt fair for both sides. That being said, I do think it's fair that DS disabled an endgame collapse. During this time you don't have to worry about gens, so every survivor can go for the save and take hits for the unhucked survivor. There is a slight problem with this change though. Survivors with DS would be able to use the base kit borrow time to take hits for the unhucker, and a killer wouldn't be able to punish them for it because DS would make chasing them too lengthy. This leads us on to the next change. Change 2. Lose collision while they have base kit BT. How this change would work is while base kit borrow time is active, you lose collision so you and the killer can pass through each other. This stops the killer from body blocking you to wait out BT, but also stops the unhucked survivor from taking hits for the unhucker because the killer can just go through them. Change 3. Base kit endurance timer is paused while in chase. This change is an extension to the last change. While in a chase, the base kit borrow time timer won't go down. This means if the killer tries to chase you straight off the huck, you'll have no collision and they won't be able to hit you. This also means if the killer finds you a little while after you've been hooked, but they haven't been chasing you, they'll be able to down you. This would hopefully allow the survivor to get to a safe area, disincentivize the killer chasing the unhooked survivor, and not keep the survivor invulnerable for too long so they can't abuse it in an unfair way. That concludes the changes I'll make to survivors that make them harder to tunnel in a way that hopefully can't be abused. To give some final thoughts on all the mentioned changes, the goal of these changes isn't to make either survivor or killer stronger, but to reduce the effectiveness of tunneling. In order to do that, buffs need to be made to both killer and survivor to make hooking different survivors more viable and to make tunneling overall weaker. Tunneling is a tricky thing to balance, but I hope these changes will make the game feel more fun and fair for both sides. If you have any ideas about changes you'd make to reduce tunneling, please leave a comment down below. I'm sure there's plenty more good ideas that I haven't thought of. Finally, I'd like to thank you for making this far, and I hope you enjoyed your time. I'd also like to thank all the people who took the time to comment on the community post I made. If you liked this video, you may enjoy some of my other videos. Currently, only 18.5% of people who watch my videos are subscribed, so if you're not subscribed and you'd like to see more videos like this, I'd ask that you do subscribe. If you'd like to see behind the scenes of my videos or updates about upcoming videos, you can follow me on Twitter. That's all for now. Thank you and goodbye.